welcome to the program. Kieran Gilbert in for David Spears, who's in Washington tonight, of course, with the Prime Minister ahead of the talks with Barack Obama at the White House in the early hours of tomorrow morning. So with me to discuss that issue, of course, and the many others of the week, we have the Parliamentary Secretary for Foreign Affairs, Senator Brett Mason, Peter Bentley from the McKell Institute, Kerry Chikarovski, former Liberal leader in New South Wales, and also the Shadow Communications Minister, Jason Clare. Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you all.
Good to be here.
Now, they say foreign relations, international relations, Senator Mason, is based, certainly at the leader level, a lot on personal rapport. Last year, Tony Abbott said that Barack Obama's was the most left-wing administration that we've seen in the US for 50 years. Does he have a lot of smoothing over tomorrow morning, our time, when he meets with President Obama?
Well, Kieran, I think in international relations, Tony Abbott has tended to defy his critics. He's actually done very well since he came to office. Let's face it, he and Julie Bishop and Andrew Robb, as Trade Minister, have put together free trade agreements with Japan and South Korea, and hopefully soon with China. At the moment, our relations with Indonesia, of course, are getting better. That was part of the recent trip. And I have no doubt that relations with Barack Obama are still very, very good, and the president of the surfboard will even add to that. I don't have any doubt that they'll get on very well.
The Malibu, for our viewers, that's for our viewers who didn't see it, the Prime Minister is going to present a Malibu board, custom made in his own electorate, with the presidential seal on it, to Barack Obama. So that's obviously a show of goodwill, but on a serious note, you're not expecting the fanfare of, say, Bush to Howard with the full-on ceremonial welcome, on the South Lawn, or even Julia Gillard addressing the Congress. There's not going to be any sort of that fanfare, is there?
Well, perhaps not. But what's important is, one, you're right, how they get along, and I'm confident they will. And secondly, let's be frank, whether there's issues about climate change, or whether how left-wing the Obama administration is, that doesn't matter that much. What really matters is Australian and American interests, and let's face it, they align, particularly in areas of the economy, investment, and of course in security. And our nations have such a strong relationship. I think that any issues, any tensions that might preside for a moment, they disappear next week. And
sources from both the Prime Minister's office and the White House have been reported widely saying that those issues that Senator Mason referred to, Jason Clare, that they're going to dominate. The issues of security, the issues of trade, investment, which I think two-way investment's up around $1 trillion, so it's huge.
Oh, Brett's right. This is a relationship that's more important than the personalities. Tony Abbott and Barack Obama are different people. They're, in a sense, political opposites, but that's not the key point here. It's the relationship between our country, Australia, and the United States, and it's a very strong one, and will only get stronger over time. And Tony Abbott will build on the work of previous Prime Ministers, Labor and Liberal, in helping to entrench that strong relationship between Australia and the United States. And so I'm sure it'll be a very successful meeting, just as the meeting that the Prime Minister had with the President of Indonesia only days ago was a successful meeting, and we wish him well.
And well, certainly that got things back on track, didn't it, Peter Bentley? I know there've been a lot of issues on the Indonesia front, but if you look at the last week for Tony Abbott, and we'll get to the climate change issue in a moment, because that's, I suppose, the point of sensitivity, but the last week's been pretty good for him, effective, with his argument about Villa, Bretonneux and the Western Front needing to have a greater focus in the centenary year of Anzac, to this meeting with Yudhoyono, which was a successful one.
No, I agree with that, and I think the meeting with Yudhoyono was necessary to patch up the relationship, but it was seemingly successful, and the announcement in France was a fantastic one, and as the great grandson of a digger who died there at Villers-Bretonneux, it's something I've been personally very passionate about, and I think the Prime Minister has really made this an issue of his own. By committing funding for the Interpretive Centre, which will be launched, I think, for the centenary in 3 or 4 years' time, and really raising this as something that we can also focus on simultaneously with the Anzac and Gallipoli legends. So that's been very positive, absolutely. I think it hasn't been obviously as tangibly successful as his first trip in Asia, where there were benefits in terms of free trade agreements and things like that, but that was never really the objective for the first part of the trip, and the proof will really be in the pudding, I think, in the next 24 hours with his meeting with President Obama.
What does he want to get out of the meeting? What will be a success for Tony Abbott tomorrow morning, our time, when he finishes up at the White House? After comments, as I say, he hasn't always been flattering of President Obama.
Yeah, but I think he is now the Prime Minister. He is now the the leader of our nation, and he is talking to the leader of the American nation, and they are going to be unfailingly polite, whether they disagree about climate change or anything else. But the reality is there is more things which they have in common than they disagree with, and we've already spoken about a few of those things. I think it's a measure of the success of this tour so far that I find it amusing that those who are the naysayers about the Prime Minister have latched onto things such as his mispronunciation of Canada. I mean, if that's all you can complain about in this particular trip, then I think he's doing exceptionally well.
Yeah, that was ridiculous.
Oh, it was stupid. It became headlines. You know what I mean? I'm thinking, how much do these people hate this man that they would actually make this a story?
But no, and from someone who mispronounces every day, that's...
Therefore, but the grace of God go we all.
Well, try and be Kerry Chikarovski, and all the people who would be embarrassed by calling me Cherry Chikarovski over the years, I'd be a very wealthy woman if I'd had $1 from everyone who'd said it. But I mean, seriously.
Yeah, it is a bit weird. I'd want to look at some of the substance of what the Prime Minister is going to be discussing about the pivot to Asia. In the lead up to the talks, the Prime Minister is giving a speech in the next few hours, actually in Washington, before his talks, and he's going to be saying to the US, basically urging them not to begrudge the rise of China. That's fine, Senator Mason, but surely they're right to be cautious about the rise of China, certainly given how their growing assertiveness in terms of foreign policy and some would say aggression in the East China and South China Seas.
Well, I accept it's a difficult foreign policy issue, and you're right. One of the great achievements of Tony Abbott thus far, and I think actually Kim Beazley put it well, our ambassador to the United States, that anyone that can balance the People's Republic of China, the United States and Japan, and keep all those balls in there at once and do it well, like Tony Abbott has done, is doing a very good job. And we've done that, and again, to be fair, to follow up with what Jason said, we've done that in Australia. We're one of the very few nations that has had a very good relationship with the United States, also with China, and also with Japan. And we're nearly unique. So
is that why the US values Australia's council, whether it be Labor, Liberal,
yes,
or whatever? Is that why they value our council on the Asia Pacific?
Correct.
China.
In Pacific, specifically in the Pacific, yes, because Australia has great connections in the Pacific, but also our long and established relationship with China that isn't complicated by superpower dynamics. Ours is principally a trading and economic relationship with China, and it's economic and, of course, strategic with the United States. And sure, there are tensions, but we have managed that balance, I think, very well. And I think that goes actually for both parties.
Do you think China? Do you think the US doesn't get China? Is there a sense that the US, that Washington, the establishment, don't get Beijing what they're on about?
No, I think that would be unfair and naive to think that. When you sit down with American diplomats and American business people, they understand it extremely well. They get it, and a former ambassador to Australia said America's doubling down on Asia. They understand that Asia is a wealth of opportunity. Just as we talk about the Asian century and the opportunity it provides for Australia, America gets that too. Yeah. From a strategic point of view, we understand and they understand that the key to growth in Asia is strategic security. And this is where the key point is. It depends upon China and the United States working together, this bilateral relationship, to ensure that you've got peace and security in Asia for that wealth to develop. And the current Joint Chiefs of Staff has talked about the Thucydides trap, going back to the Peloponnesian War, the threat that Sparta saw in a rising Athens, and going to war to try and counter that threat, and has made the point we need to make sure that America doesn't react in that way too. That's right. You've got to welcome the rise of China for the opportunity it presents, And as the Prime Minister said overnight, and previous Prime Ministers have said as well, we want to make sure that they're good international citizens that comply with international law.
That's a big if, isn't it, at the moment, given the unilateral move to establish an air identification zone in the East China Sea. There are claims around Vietnam that are unilateral.
And that's why
they call it the 9-dash line, I think, and that goes completely inside the exclusive economic zone of Vietnam. So, are they being a responsible citizen? Can we balance both?
Well, I think you can, and it's in China's interest as well. We talked in the 60s about mutually assured destruction. You could talk today about mutually assured economic destruction. If tension was to lead to some sort of cataclysmic event, it would hurt China as it would hurt America, as it would hurt the world. And forums like the East Asia Summit are critical here, multilateral forums that get China, the United States, Australia for that matter, Japan and Russia together to try and address these issues and make sure they're resolved peacefully.
Peter Bentley, the Prime Minister is going to urge or reiterate his support for the US pivot to the Asia-Pacific and encourage that to continue. Is there a sense that that is not as strong as it might be or as we were led to believe?
I don't think it's that, and I think the point that Senator Mason's made, and I've heard the Prime Minister will make in his reported remarks, that the role Australia can play is not as a competitor to the US, but as an ally that understands China and can assist in this pivot is a very strong one. I don't think it's so much that the pivot hasn't been as strong. I think my own personal view is it was delayed. It should have taken place many years earlier, but it's more now about providing the assistance so that that pivot can be economic and diplomatic and not seen to be antagonistic. And as Jason was making the point, I thought to myself, it was about 10 years ago, a book came out called The Beijing Consensus, and it kind of started this debate about what will a rising China kind of seek, how will it seek to influence global norms and things like that. And the consensus since has essentially been that China really seeks multilateralism and self-determination. You know, those are two of their fundamental core principles. And Australia has a very strong role to play in assisting that multilateralism with the US and in forums like ASEAN, G20, etc., etc. And I think, you know, if the Prime Minister highlights those, as I'm sure he will, and the opportunities that we can provide in Brisbane later this year, the G20, then that'll be very positive for Australia, very positive for the US, very positive for China.
The Prime Minister also wants to argue that the need for a strengthening of our intelligence sharing and security cooperation. Kerry Chikarovski, in the wake of the Snowden revelations and all of the debacle that flowed from that, is now the time to be going even harder and saying, OK, all chips in and basically strengthening it even further, when maybe we should take a step back and be a bit more cautious.
Oh, I think he's been fairly clear about making sure that this is done in a way in which we're not going to antagonise our neighbours, as has happened previously with Indonesia. I mean, he's been quite clear about that, but he's also very clear in his discussions with, you know, the world leaders that we've seen, that it's about ensuring our mutual protection. So he's saying that, you know, we need to have security, we need to have intelligence, we need to be sharing that intelligence for our mutual benefit. I mean, there is no doubt. You know, we are collectively, as countries around the Pacific and indeed around the world, we are facing threats which we should be looking at together. And I think that's what he's been saying. I think, yes, certainly the Snowden stuff hasn't been, you know, helpful in terms of any international relations really anywhere in the world, and we acknowledge that, and perhaps some better security around how that intelligence is gathered is something which everybody should be looking at. But there is no doubt that it is not something that we should be walking away from, and we as a nation shouldn't be walking away from our own, you know, our own national security issues. Let's work together, though, to make sure that we can deliver a good outcome for everyone.
I suppose, and the argument that goes further to what Kerry Chikarovski's just said, Jason, Clare, is the fact that intelligence prevents surprises, doesn't it? You know, as much as people might not like having their phones tapped or whatever else, it does prevent potentially damaging, volatile surprises for our own.
And the key to intelligence is the sharing of intelligence between friends. The Five Eyes is a good example of that. The US, Canada, Australia, UK and New Zealand share a lot of information. We're the beneficiary of a lot of that. It helps to protect Australia, and no doubt, Kerry, you're absolutely right, the Snowden intervention, the release of that information has been terrible for the United States and for Australia and our relationships with our friends. That doesn't mean that you stop sharing intelligence. It means you've got to be better at the way in which you control it and the way people get access to it. But the sharing of intelligence doesn't stop and shouldn't stop because it's critical to Australia's national security.
Because the moment we stop and there is a disaster of some sort, a terrible attack, then everyone will say, well, why the hell?
That's
you know,
right.
What were people doing that they didn't stop this? Why, why weren't they sharing it? How come we didn't know about it?
But the problem is...
Or apologetic, should we?
Well, not apologetic, but surely there are those in other capital cities in our region who look to this and are concerned, suspicious, or do you think that they all basically, Beijing, wherever else Jakarta, that they say, well, we do the same thing, so get on with it?
Currently, of course, we're negotiating a
Code of conduct.
Code of conduct with Indonesia. We're doing that right now, Kieran. But let's be candid about this. People's Republic of China has their own intelligence system. Russia does. Many countries do. We shouldn't be apologetic about it. Jason's right. We should be careful, how we dispense that and how it's circulated. I accept that, and that is right. And perhaps in the past we've been too loose. Who knows? But we shouldn't be apologetic about obtaining appropriate intelligence. It's in the interest of our national security.
Well, probably right now, if you look at the need for it right now in the context of global instability around the Middle East, Syria, nationals, Australian nationals and others returning, it's probably more crucial now in many respects than ever.
Correct, it is. And we want intelligence about, for example, who's coming back from Syria. We want that. It's in our national interest to get it, and we shouldn't apologise. The difficulty will be in the future with another Snowden incident could compromise our capacity. But
okay, well, there's been
we're not going to give that up.
There's been a lot of common ground in the first segment of this program. Let's see if we can fire things up.
Come on, Kieran, get controversial.
We're going to talk a bit about climate change after the break. Stay with us.
Synovus Mini Bursts Immune give you a real burst of flavour to help keep you healthy through winter. Because the better you are, the better they'll be. Synovus. Start something healthy.
The David Jones clearance is now on, with savings of up to 50% throughout the store. Shop now for a limited time. David Jones.
Play track.
See the Holden Cruise in a new light with the new Special Edition Z Series.
Rocket science, not simple. Online shopping should be simple. Filling out your shipping address, billing address, card number, not simple. With PayPal, you're done in a few clicks.
Hungry Jack's molten chocolate pudding and delicious hot chocolate are now available from only $1.50. The burgers are better at Hungry Jack's.
Suffering from a cold or the flu? Take Adult Strength Dimetap, a powerful liquid capsule with Fast in the formula for effective round-the-clock relief from your tough cold and flu symptoms. Dimetap Day-Night, liquid relief with Fast in the formula.
The David Jones clearance is now on, with savings of up to 50% throughout the store. Shop now for a limited time. David Jones.
Here we have the lovely air-filled kitchen, plenty of room for the fridge, and there is the bath, right next to the microwave. And here's the home office. It is lovely out here in the evenings.
Now, there is a lot of interest in the property, but I think you could probably get it for around...
Finally, something that costs less than it should. The Tiguan from just $27,990 and with a 2.8% comparison rate. Or the Golf from just $22,990 for a limited time only.
Volkswagen, das Auto. More channels, more choice, more drama.
I will rule.
Adventure and thrills. More than anywhere else.
The best time.
We are Subscription TV. Now in our 20th year, spending $700 million.
Winner is...
Employing 7,000. Adding $1.6 billion to our economy.
The Australian subscription television industry. We've got quite a story to tell.
Thanks for your company this evening on The Nation. With me, Parliamentary Secretary for Foreign Affairs, Senator Brett Mason, Peter Bentley, Director of the McKell Institute, the former New South Wales Liberal leader Kerry Chikarovski, and the Shadow Communications Minister Jason Clare. Jason Clare, to you now on the issue of climate change ahead of the Prime Minister's talks at the White House. There's been a lot made of the different world view of Mr Abbott and President Obama. Labor likes to say that Tony Abbott's isolated on this issue, but he's not, is he? Because the trip started with Stephen Harper, who could not have given a more ringing endorsement of the position on scrapping the carbon tax. And President Obama's not introducing a carbon price, is he, as much as he'd like to? Even when the Democrats controlled the Congress, he couldn't do it.
Well, the big difference here is that President Obama wants to put in place an emissions trading scheme or a cap and trade system, but can't get it through his Congress, can't get it through his Parliament, whereas in Australia the Prime Minister doesn't want an emissions trading scheme, but if he did, he could get it through the Parliament. The President can't do that, so he's looking for other ways and means to do that, and his system would put a cap and encourage the states to adopt a market mechanism. So he's serious about it. I don't think most people think the Prime Minister is serious about climate change. He certainly doesn't think it's the important issue that other world leaders do.
And there was a difference of opinion, very public difference of opinion in New York this week. David Spears, the gentleman that's normally in this seat, interviewed a spokesman for Ban Ki-moon, and he said that it should be the #1 priority of all world leaders. And then at the same time, pretty much, or within an hour of that, Tony Abbott said it is not the #1 priority. So a very clear difference of opinion when it comes to at least the UN.
Yeah, and I think the difference, though, is we have to look at what the President is doing and what outcome he can achieve. If it was his #1 priority, then perhaps he might have been able to get it through when he did control the Congress and the Senate as he did, and he didn't. He's now handed it back to the states and asked them to provide the mechanisms by which they're going to do it. And I don't know if you've been reading the New York Times lately, Kieran, but I pick it up every now and then. I'll go online and read it, and there's a hell of a lot of governors over there who are basically telling the President to go and stick it. So, whether it's an effective way of doing it, it's, he's put the target in place through through their EPA, but the mechanism of delivering it is very much up in the air. So some of them might take an emissions trading scheme, others he's encouraging them to take a direct action approach. Oh, big surprise, heard those words before. So look, I think that it might be an issue for the President now, mainly because he's no longer going to be President in 2 years' time. He's got to try and make this something that he can leave with his administration. But I'm still not convinced that in the United States you're going to get much of a change.
Well, the point is there are differences of opinion between the Prime Minister and the United Nations. At least Ban Ki-moon wants all world leaders to get to New York in September for a summit in the lead up to Paris, which is basically beyond the next phase of Kyoto. They want to build momentum. Tony Abbott's not going to go. Does that show that he's not really a significant supporter or believer of this issue, that he remains a sceptic?
Kieran, no, I think that Tony Abbott, indeed all developed countries, leaders of all developed countries, accept that climate change is a challenge, clearly. It's what you do about it. It's what you do about it. You mentioned direct action, Kerry, whether that's energy efficiency, soils and tree planting and so forth. That's what the coalition wants to do. President Obama has perhaps slightly different views, although I'm not sure they're as different as perhaps has been aired the last day or so. But let me make a prediction. That under the Obama administration, the last, 2.5 years of it, we will not see an emissions trading system or a carbon tax within the next 2.5 years in the United States.
Not across the board,
Not across the board.
There's one in California.
I mean a national system. Yeah. I make that prediction, and I think that I know he's trying to do a lot by executive action then through the states, but even then he's going to need money from Congress, and I think with the current state of the United States Congress, people that are subject to elections, President Obama won't be facing another election because he's got 2.5 years to go and that's it. Kieran, I don't think senators and members of the House of Representatives in the United States will be voting for a carbon tax or an ETS.
And the thing is,
I'm not
it's
trying
actually,
to be particularly, controversial,
no.
but I think that's right.
Even when, like Kerry Chikarovski suggested, even when the Democrats controlled the Congress in 2009, they were not able to pass any bill. So the Democrats are just as opposed to this.
He's got leading Democrats who are up for election in November coming out saying they're campaigning against him.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the chances of getting a national scheme is zilch. The chances of, the country, of each state adopting a scheme is zilch, given the number of Republican and particularly affected states which are coal reliant. So that's not going to happen. So if he's realistic about it, the best way that the President of the United States could reduce emissions in the United States is to encourage direct action.
But there's actually not that much in terms of the target that he set last week. If you look at the 2005 level, they're already halfway there because of the shale gas revolution.
That's exactly right.
Technology,
The technology,
Yeah.
and,
But I think
and the shale gas, the use of that gas has reduced, I think, halved it, or more than halved it.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely.
So the goal is actually not that great anyway.
And this gets to, I think, the broader point, and it's not the specifics of different schemes of carbon trading or direct action or what proportion of GDP we're spending on renewables. It's actually the momentum and what we're seeing internationally, particularly over the last 6 months, is a real momentum for further action, whether it's from the US, whether it's from the EU, whether it's from Xi Jinping in China. And the challenge and I think the conflict that people are witnessing and expecting may take place over the next 6 months is essentially there are kind of three leaders internationally, globally, that are trying to push back against the tide. Tony Abbott's one, Stephen Harper's the other, and Vladimir Putin's the third. And this is, we have a state of affairs in this country where we have an emissions trading scheme, and Tony Abbott's proposal is to scrap that and take a retrograde step. And so that is where it's not the dollars and cents, it's not the mechanism, it's actually the momentum that we're moving towards. And while I don't disagree with your prediction, Senator, I'd posit another, that when it comes to these things, when China decides to move, China will move very quickly. And in a few years' time, or a few months' time, Xi Jinping may decide that China will move quickly by imposing tariffs on all high-polluting imports. And that would be Australian coal. And that would be other services that we're providing. And the point of a carbon emissions trading scheme is to try and actually restructure the whole economy so that we're prepared for that. And that is my fear in the short to medium term, that Australian businesses will be caught out.
Brett Mason, you can respond to that, but also I suppose that the point further to what Peter said there is that the Chinese will have a very... It's a unique situation in that it's a one-party state. There's no Congress to have to worry about. They decide it happens. The second thing is they live it. They live that pollution, and whether it's climate change or whatever the motivation is to clean up those plants or the factories. That if you're in Beijing or Shanghai,
I think we've all been there, and I accept that. But also, you'd have to accept that every week they've got a new coal-powered power station coming forward. So, their consumption of coal is rising all the time. It's not going backwards; it's actually rising. But look, I'm not saying that what you say is necessarily wrong, but I'll say this: that I'll see it when I believe it. When a nation actually says, like the People's Republic of China, or other countries that use enormous amounts of energy or export it, like Brazil and Russia and India, Canada, Australia, United States. When countries like that start to move, then I think there might be, action throughout the world. But I lived through 2009, Kerry, the debates in federal parliament, and everyone thought that Copenhagen would be the answer. So I am a sceptic. I'm a sceptic that there's going to be enormous movement in the short term, and I really am. I just think that the Chinese may tinker at the edges, but I do not think that their consumption of coal will decrease. In fact, it will increase. I think in the end that this issue will largely be overcome, as you mentioned before, by technology.
Stephen Harper.
Can I make a point?
You can, and also I'll add another thing you can respond to as well. Stephen Harper said at that news conference with the Prime Minister that we're just more frank about it, that no country is going to allow any policy to deal with climate change or global warming that's going to clobber their economy or jobs. I think the words to that effect. Yeah. We're just more frank about it.
Oh, and look, that's absolutely right. You want to put in place a policy that helps to make sure the economy grows, but emissions don't. And the argument from economists is the most efficient way to do that is a market-based mechanism rather than direct investment. I think Brett is right when you say technology is important. China will continue to invest in more and more coal-fired power stations. Even while they go nuclear, they're still investing in more coal. And so clean coal is going to be critical. Some people say it won't happen. If we're going to solve this problem longer term, that's going to be a critical part of the solution.
I think you're right.
But the point I'd make more generally is if you accept the argument that either in the short or the medium term there's going to be an international agreement and Australia will have international obligations, then it makes sense for the country, for our country, to make sure that we put in place policies to help to make sure that we meet those targets and that we do it in the most efficient way possible. And the sooner you act, the easier it is to meet those targets. If we were to wait a decade and then have to meet targets drastically, it would really seriously damage the Australian economy. But if you do it early, you do it in a staged way, then you can effectively re-engineer the economy in a way that you can increase growth without increasing emissions. The economists argue that a market-based mechanism is the way to do that.
But wasn't there a report a few years ago from UBS on the European emissions trading scheme which said basically that the billions of dollars that they'd spent on the scheme had made lots of money for people who were trading and had done nothing about reducing the emissions, and if they'd actually taken that money and invested it in direct action, they would have reduced emissions by 40% by doing exactly what you're talking about, cleaning up the coal-powered stations, investing in the technology. So, I mean, I read that and I go, well, that is an economist. That is someone who you would respect and whose opinion you'd think. I mean, I know it's a couple of years ago, but it still is a fairly potent argument.
And I suppose if we go to another level on this debate, and Labor saying that Tony Abbott doesn't get it or he's not a believer, there's this sort of religious language around the issue. I know, but and there's a lot of criticism about that. But
there's some foul language around it.
There is. There is.
But, you've been following Twitter again, have you?
No. I'm trying to quit.
But the criticism that he's not going to attend this UN summit in September, why does he have to? If other countries are there, surely our foreign minister would do just as good a job, or Senator Mason, another senior figure in the government.
I'm sure Brett would do a wonderful job. Look, it's bigger than that, though. You've got the President of the United States wanting to put it on the agenda in Brisbane at the G20, and I would have thought it's a fairly straightforward thing to have that on the agenda for a meeting of the top 20 economies of the world. It should be on. If you've got a number of large economies saying they want to discuss this as part of that meeting, and let's be frank about it, this is not just an environmental issue, it's an economic issue.
The government doesn't want the agenda cluttered. They want that's the point, that they want to make some progress, and it should be an economic summit. Joe Hockey said he's chaired 2 of these finance ministers' meetings that the issue hasn't come up.
Yeah, and it is an economic summit, and this is an economic issue. And I see no harm in it being discussed at that meeting. Hopefully the Prime Minister will change his mind.
It doesn't look like it.
I'm sure we will be represented, Kieran. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
What about the G20, though, on the agenda? That it's not on the agenda.
I read Joe Hockey's comments as well. He said that he doesn't want to clutter the agenda, and also it hasn't come up in any of the finance ministers' discussions thus far. That doesn't mean it won't in the future, but I think that the G20 agenda is pretty full.
But what about the UN summit? Should the Prime Minister attend and show that he's serious about it, or
well, I think he's serious. And as Kerry said, I mean, direct action is a serious policy, but he's got stacks of other commitments. I know that, particularly in the second half of the year. But will we represented, Kieran? I have no doubt about that.
Do you think that what President Obama? I'll put the point to you that I mentioned a bit earlier. Do you think that this goal that he's announced is actually doesn't amount to much at all, or do you think that it is something that he's going to struggle, as Kerry says, to get through, or is it a bit of both?
Perhaps a bit of both. Look, I think, frankly, he's sincere. I'm sure he is.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm sure he believes it. But in a sense, it's now a legacy issue nearly. You know, 2.5 years to go. He's never going to have to face election for anything ever again. You know, he won't be standing for any other elected position. Well, he could in theory, but I suspect he won't be. But if he were accountable again for, you know, in an electoral context, I suspect he wouldn't quite have the same vigour. I don't mean that rudely at all.
No.
But I think it's sincere, it's well intended. But I don't think it's going to go very far.
Before we go to a break, I just want to throw something at you without notice, because that's fun, I think.
It's all without notice, isn't it, Kerry?
Yeah, that's right. There's a lot of talk in the US at the moment about 2016 and who's going to be the candidates. Hillary Clinton is giving every sign that she's going to run, and I saw the Prime Minister met with Jeb Bush in New York. They're the two favourites, you'd think, Jason, Clare, at this stage?
Well, at this stage, it's early days, and I think you're right. I think Hillary will run, and I'd be surprised if anyone put their hand up in the Democratic Party against her if she chooses to run. On the Republican side, I think it's more of an open field, and I think Jeb Bush could run. It'd be fantastic to see another Clinton-Bush election. But there are a number of people who could put their hand up, and if history's any guide, you wouldn't be able to pick a winner until well through the primary process.
Well, apparently, just looking up at this in the last couple of weeks, Jeb Bush was meant to be the one. Yeah. But his brother became governor before he did, and hence...
So there's a bit of family rivalry going on. Look, I think that I'm always intrigued by the American primary system because, you know, country of 200 million, you get these extraordinary people on occasion putting their hands up for the primaries. I mean, people who in this country, you just wouldn't even... I mean, if they're wealthy, they're experienced in many ways, but they have such extreme views in both left and right on occasion. And I'm like Jason. I mean, I don't think you could say at this stage that anyone's going to be the front runner, because we all thought last time, two elections ago, we all thought that Hillary Clinton was the front runner then. And, you know, look what happened. We got Barack Obama. So I actually think their whole system of pre-selecting the candidate, and this time we get two. This time we get two lots of primaries because we haven't got an incumbent. So I would just say, watch this space.
What does podcast say? It's the greatest show on earth. He's right.
He loves it, doesn't he? Yeah, it's going to be fun to watch anyway. Let's take a break on The Nation. Back, and still a lot more to talk about, including a Royal Commission which continues into the Union. Stay with us.
Drivers saving with Coles Car Insurance Price Beat Guarantee?
I saved $372.
Jump online or call today to find out.
Coles Little Red Quote.
Have you been up all night?
I'm looking for hotel deals.
Why didn't you just go to Hotels Combined? They compare hundreds of travel sites in seconds.
Hotels Combined. Find the best price in seconds at hotelscombined.com.
$7 Subway footlong sub.
Fuel up at Subway right now for only $7 with your choice between 7 Subway footlong subs. Grab your favourite, available all day at Subway.
You've earned a tax break at Officeworks. So, add up all the deductions you could make from a tax-deductible printer, connected to a tax-deductible laptop, connected to a tax-deductible hard drive. Because when you take a tax break at Officeworks, everything could be tax-deductible.
It's time to power up with Battery World's end of financial year sale. Buy one cordless phone battery, get one free. Buy one coin cell battery, get one free. Power up with more bargains galore at Battery World. Keeps you switched on.
It's Coles No Annual Fee MasterCard time.
Apply and get $50 off one Coles shop if approved by July 8th.
$50 off a Coles shop.
Coles No Annual Fee MasterCard. Apply today.
Coles MasterCard.
It's more than the driver. It's more than the car. For Lotus F1T, the winning edge starts with the cloud. Powered by Microsoft Dynamics, Azure, and Office 365. The team can analyze and share data from over 200 sensors, working in sync to make the calls that make the difference between winning and losing. This is the Microsoft Cloud.
1 in 2 Australian adults suffer from sensitive teeth. Sensitivity occurs when the surface under your tooth enamel becomes exposed. Sensodyne Repair and Protect doesn't just mask the pain, it also helps to repair sensitive teeth. Powered by Novaman technology, Sensodyne forms a bond with your teeth, repairing the holes that cause sensitivity. Don't just relieve, repair with Sensodyne Repair and Protect. Now 30% off at Coles.
When you need to know, skynews.com.au delivers the unrivaled coverage of our news networks, fast and formatted to your device. Wherever you can log on, skynews.com.au is breaking news, business, politics.
Is this cheating? I don't know.
Your city, national and local weather, the best analysis, the commentators you trust. Skynews.com.au is the online news service Australia turns to. Rebuilt, re-energised, powered by Telstra.
Welcome back to the program. With me tonight we've got Senator Brett Mason, the Parliamentary Secretary for Foreign Affairs, Peter Bentley from the McKell Institute, Kerry Chikarovski, former Liberal leader in New South Wales, and Labor frontbencher Jason Clare. Let's go to the Royal Commission into Union governance and corruption. Jason Clare, Bill Shorten rejects the claims made by a former AWU official yesterday that he told him to just, keep it quiet, claims of corruption and so on. Many years ago, but the fact that he's even mentioned, it's not a great look, is it?
Well, you're right. Bill Clinton. Bill Shorten.
We've moved on.
We have. Sorry.
We were talking about that before.
We're into the third segment, aren't we?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, so Bill Shorten has said that is untrue. It strikes me, on the topic generally, it strikes me as it's curious that you establish a Royal Commission into unions and corruption, and then the first investigation that the Royal Commission does is into events that took place 20 years ago or more. And you would think that if you were going to do something like this, you would look at something which is happening now, which is threatening Australia now, rather than going back.
Well, they're going to the HSU next week. That's much more contemporary.
Wouldn't you start there? It just strikes me as if you want to show that you're serious, you'd look at something which is happening right now, rather than it smacks of being political that you'd go back 20 years.
Except if you want to build up a picture of ongoing corruption over a number of years, you need to start at some point, I suppose. And that, the allegations are that that there's corruption which has been in a number of these unions for some time now. So I suppose I take the point. It's because because the former Prime Minister was involved, that makes it look incredibly political. But I do actually think, because one of the arguments about having this is, and I've heard a number of your colleagues say, well, why do you need a Royal Commission if there's criminal conduct? Then we should just take it to the police and have the police charge things. I would have thought that the experience in New South Wales, for example, with an ICAC, which looks at corruption, which may or may not lead to criminal charges, is probably the reason why you need a Royal Commission to look at corruption issues whenever they may have occurred, and perhaps to see if they are ongoing.
Well, I've got a slightly different view. In my last job, I did a lot of work in weeding out corruption in customs, and through organisations like ACLI, which is the federal version of the Police Integrity Commission. Yep. But also the Australian Crime Commission, which has the powers of a standing Royal Commission that can call people in, tap phones, get the information that they need. People don't have the right to silence; they've got to answer questions. You can get to the core of things. Now, the government's decided that they're going to have a Royal Commission. I think that the risk for the government here is that it will be seen to be political, that it's political payback, trying to target a former Prime Minister here. You only have to go back to the Costigan Royal Commission back in the early 80s to see these things can cut both ways. In the early 80s, Fraser set up that Royal Commission into unions and corruption. One of the people that was first to be identified was a Liberal Party donor. And this is a risk for the government as well.
This is ICAC too. Kerry,
look at ICAC.
That's exactly right.
ICAC was set up by Nick Greiner to weed out corruption within the Labor Party.
He was the first victim of it.
And he was the first.
Senator Mason, well, you can respond to a couple of those
Kieran,
points.
I support the Royal Commission. I think the vast majority of union members are decent people, and it's legitimate for them to know that the money, their dues, are being spent appropriately, not in some sort of slush fund. But
why not the Crime Commission, as Mr Clare points out? It's got the standing powers of a Royal Commission.
Sure, but I think you need a context, and I think the Royal Commission is a better way of drawing that evidence in. But I do accept Jason's point that it's inappropriate for me to jump to any conclusions about Mr Shorten or Ms Gillard or anyone else. It's not appropriate for politicians to have a running commentary on contemporary allegations made that day at a Royal Commission. I think we've got to wait until the Royal Commission has run its course.
Peter Bentley, what are the implications out of this, do you think, as you look at this this commission, where it is at the moment, I suppose the contemporary implications politically?
The contemporary implications are frustration, and we've frustration for contemporary union leaders, and as we've seen today with Bill Shorten when he wants to be talking about the budget, but has to answer questions about this. But I think that's the extent of it, because I genuinely believe that people kind of look at this and see that it smacks of political payback. It's just focused on unions. The ACTU a few weeks ago put up a proposal and said, well, if this is genuinely about governance and looking at funds that have been established, taking into account the revelations that we've seen in New South Wales and the ICAC, this should be expanded to all organisations, employer organisations. That was rejected, and that hasn't been included. So I think the general sense in the community is this is a witch hunt. The fact that it has started with the former Prime Minister's ex-boyfriend has only solidified those perceptions. Now, if in time there is genuine wrongdoing that has not already been exposed through the courts, then of course that's a good thing. But I think that's very unlikely, and as a result, I think once we've kind of gotten through the media circus of it, the overall impact will be quite limited.
Okay, let's wrap up now with a look at the broader budget debate. Joe Hockey says the government's job is to get people to the starting line, but inevitably some will run faster than others. He's saying that the budget is fair. What do you say to his argument that he's framing now around the budget, that essentially this is really about protecting those most vulnerable who need the help, because it's making the system sustainable, a welfare system that makes up 35% of the overall budget?
Well, Joe Hockey's on a hiding to nothing here, because I think people have made up their mind. They don't think the budget is fair, and so he can say this as much as he likes. I don't think it's going to change people's views. They've looked at the budget and they don't think that it's fair, and that's a big problem for the government, because in Australia, much of the political debate and much of the debate around the barbecue or at the pub is this fair or not? It's embedded in our national anthem, and people have made up their mind. They've decided it's not fair. The facts don't lie. When you look at the budget, you see that people like us have to chip in a couple of $100 a year. People that are on low incomes and pensioners over time are going to have to put in thousands of dollars. So when Joe Hockey says we've all got to carry our weight, we've all got to chip in, I think most people would say, I understand that and I agree. But when you look at what the budget does, the poorer you are, the harder you hit.
What the argument, Kerry Chikarovski, that Mr Hockey made last night in this speech was pointing out that for the average worker, that they have to work 1 month of the year to subsidise the welfare of another Australian. Is that something that will resonate?
I think it's pretty powerful, actually. I'd never actually thought of it in those terms, and I think, it got a lot of coverage today, and I think people would say, well, hold on, do I think that's fair? And to go to your point about fairness, I mean, the argument around the students, for example, paying more. I mean, the other argument I've heard, Mr Hockey put out about that is why should 60% of Australians who don't go to university be paying for the small number who do? And I think those are the sorts of things which he's starting to point out about this budget within the community that will start to resonate. The co-payment, for example. I mean, I know that there's a lot of angst about the co-payment, but again, the idea that you would, absolutely overwhelm the whole medical system because you got so expensive that you couldn't actually provide care properly at all. Is that not better to say, well, let's pay a bit now rather than getting to that situation in the future?
But do you frame the budget a month after it's delivered? I suppose that's the problem, isn't it? It's too late.
I think I made a comment about this the other day, and I don't think my Liberal colleagues were too happy about it. But I said I think what happened was that I think that the Prime Minister and the Treasurer perhaps were quite taken aback by the animosity with which the budget was received by a lot of quarters. And I think in doing so, they kind of almost took a deep breath and thought, oh my God, how do we deal with it now? And that's, as I said, they don't like me for saying those sorts of things, but I do think that they're now realising that they weren't selling it as positively as they should from day one. and they're starting to do that now. And there is still a lot of time to actually sell it because, I mean, you know, the sort of thing, like, for example, with the co-payment, it's not actually now, it's not happening now, so they've got time to explain it and to explain about the fees and all the things for students.
There's a political question as well, Kerry, because how long does the government want to bleed on some of these issues? With the co-payment, with the university reforms and pensions, the chances of them getting through the Senate, I would think, are very low.
Well, let's go to Senator Mason, get your thoughts on that.
You're up there.
Well, I think what is unfair is if we ask future generations, our kids and our grandkids, to pay for our current lifestyle, you know, whether it's health, education, welfare. If we want to have a sustainable system, whether it's health with the co-payment or education with universities, you know, the idea of asking students to pay more in higher education, if we're going to fund about 40% of young Australians now go, they're going to, the government cannot afford anymore to pay for everyone. When I went to university, I started in 1980, 15% of young people went. Now 2.5 times as many go. Let's face it, with health, and Jason, and I've read what you said about this, we all accept demography's destiny. It's an ageing population, we have to do something. I think we all accept that. So again, we have to address these issues. If we're going to make it sustainable, whether it's health, whether it's education, we have to ask.
But should there be a better safety net? That's the because it's not just Kerry Chikarovski. She's not the only Liberal that's raised issues. Even John Howard said that budgets and policies need to win the fairness test.
Well, I think it is fair. This is a problem that's faced throughout the Western world, and you know it'd be so easy. All the democratic incentives would say to the coalition, to Joe Hockey and the Prime Minister, look, just ease off. But I don't want to see, at the moment, our budget deficit's about, what, 225 billion? In 9 years, it'll be 3 times that. That's just on current projections. The trajectory's like that. Now, I don't want to see that. I don't want to see a European-style economy. None of us do. I think all of us accept that generations should live within their means, not just for economic reasons, but for moral reasons.
So, but is there a prospect that the government's gone further?
No.
Just to come back a bit with negotiations?
I accept that there's pain. I accept that. I don't deny that at all, but people are feeling it. But you know what? That will be dwarfed, Kieran. The pain that people will feel in 9 or 10 years' time when the deficit has trebled and we have to start taking remedial action. I'm not saying it's not tough. I'm not saying that. But it'll be a hell of a lot worse if we just allow the debt to ratchet up. We have to do something now. It is painful, but nowhere near as painful as it would be in 9 years' time. You know,
I suppose when you look at... Yeah, sorry.
No, when the debt would be 2/3 of $1 trillion. And I'm not making those figures up. That's why we have to act now.
And the point that Joe Hockey made, Peter Bentley, last night is that, and I know from a couple of Liberals that they're frustrated this point hasn't been made more effectively, is that our tax system is already a progressive system in the sense that up the scale people pay more, and I think it's 10% of income earners pay 2/3 of the tax. So already isn't that a fairness equation that's in there?
Well, here's the thing, and you raised the point, Kieran, and John Howard nailed it when he said, you know, people won't accept measures that they don't see as fair. And Senator Mason's point is right to the extent that people will... There is pain, and people will accept pain if they believe that it is being fairly distributed. But this budget doesn't do that. And the NAPSEM, and I won't labour on with the stats, but the NAPSEM modelling has shown that the bottom 20%, the poorest 20% of Australians, are suffering a 2.2% real decrease in their annual wages, and the top 20% are suffering a 0.2% decrease. It is not being fairly distributed. Now, if Joe Hockey had taken some tough political decisions and on the upper end had touched superannuation concessions, had touched capital gains, had talked about negative gearing, had delivered some serious pain to upper and middle income earners, then I think we would see Australian pensioners, Australian students, Australian people on the dole feeling less disgusted by the inequity of this budget. But when it is patently obvious that it is poor, sick and old people in Australia that are responsible for doing the bulk of the carrying on this, they are going to always reject it and be quite angry about a treasurer that says this is fair.
Kerry Chikarovski, is there a lot of political pain here for what Jason Clare alluded to earlier, is probably not a lot of gain when you look at the policies in the sense that they might not
Get through the Senate.
well, the GP co-payment's not going to get through.
Well, it's interesting because I actually was reading some, I can't remember which paper it was in, but they went to various parties to ask them about various parts of this budget. And what I was curious about was that the Greens will support a bit of it, the PUP will support a bit of it, the other crossbenchers will support a bit of it. It may be that there is such enormous horse trading in the Senate over this budget that most of it will get through because each part of it will appeal to a particular constituency. For example, the levy on the high income earners, Greens are going to support that. They're happy with that. So I think that I put it this way: I don't think I'd like to be up there and being the person conducting negotiations. I'm sure that the Prime Minister and the Treasurer will be much involved, but I suspect Matthias Cormann will be much involved as he's in the Senate. And Senator, I suspect you will all be called upon to do your part to try and negotiate with the various interest groups that are in the Senate at the moment.
The Senate is a notoriously unruly beast for everyone. So.
Well, and I mean, if you saw the interview the interviews the other day with some of the new senators from the PUP, clearly some of them have different views from Clive.
Yeah.
So
Senator Mason might be required to fall on your Peking duck and have some banana split with Clive Palmer.
Kieran, the government's in an awful situation. You've got a budget that's as popular as anthrax, and you've got a responsibility in government until you decide to fall on your sword and say you can't get this through the Senate to argue the case for it. Now, I suspect you and I, and we're all going to be talking about the Medicare co-payment, the university changes, the pension changes for the next few months until they hit a point in the Senate where they fail. And that means we're going to continue to be talking about these things which are extremely unpopular in the community, and that'll be to the government's detriment.
But you're assuming that they will fail because you're assuming that all those who are against it will vote against every part of it. And that's not necessarily going to be the case, Jason.
Because the Senate's unruly. It looks like PUP might be as well.
From the 1st of July, Clive Palmer has the balance of power. If Labor and the Greens vote against something, then he decides whether it happens or not. And on the co-payment, on the university reforms and on the pension, he said he's going to vote against those.
We've got to go. Brett Mason, Peter Bentley, Kerry, Chikarovski and Jason Clare, thank you all.
Thanks, Kerry.
And thank you for your company as well. David Spears will be back next week. Thanks for having me tonight. See you next